I want to start today with a question that might sting a little. What are you carrying at work that is not yours to carry? And I do not mean your workload. I mean the unwritten expectations, the emotional labor of reading a room before you even open your mouth, the mental gymnastics of figuring out whether what just happened in that meeting was bias or if you were overthinking it. The exhaustion of being simultaneously too visible and completely invisible. If you felt that, stay right here, because today we are unpacking all of it. Welcome back to Rise and Thrive. I'm Shay Blackman, DBA candidate in organizational leadership, and for over 20 years, I have been working inside organizational cultures across automotive manufacturing, healthcare, and professional services. Not just observing them, transforming them. And if there is one thing I know after 2 decades of culture work, it is this. The system is not broken. It is operating exactly as it was designed. The question is whether you understand the design well enough to navigate it strategically. Today, we are diving into Chapter 2 of my book, Rise and Thrive, A Black Woman's Blueprint for Leadership Excellence, and the topic is Navigating Corporate Cultures with Strategic Intelligence. This is the second time we are visiting this chapter in the series, and I wanted to come back to it now because of what I am watching unfold in 2026. We are seeing organizations restructure their cultures in real time. Remote work policies are shifting. DEI functions are being quietly absorbed into other departments or eliminated entirely. And the informal power dynamics that have always existed are becoming even more concentrated as companies tighten operations. For Black women, this is not an abstract conversation. This is about whether you make it to the next level or get stuck in the middle. Toni Morrison told us plainly, you want to fly, you have got to give up what weighs you down. So today, we are identifying the weight, and we are developing the strategic intelligence to release it. All right, let's get into the framework. In Chapter 2 of Rise and Thrive, I lay out a foundational concept that once you see, you cannot unsee. Every organization operates on 2 parallel systems. There is the formal system, which is the org chart, the policies, the official procedures, the competency models, the performance review criteria. And then there is the informal system, the unwritten rules, the real power dynamics, the relationships that actually determine who gets promoted, who gets heard, and who gets left behind. Now, most leadership advice focuses on the formal system. Hit your metrics, exceed expectations, get your certifications, and that matters. But here's what nobody tells you. Mastering the formal system is necessary but not sufficient, especially for Black women, because the informal system is where the game is actually played. Let me break this down through what I call the 4 observation points. These are the areas I encourage you to study like a scientist, and they come directly from the chapter. Observation point 1, decision-making patterns. Ask yourself, where do the real decisions get made in your organization? Because I promise you, it is rarely in the meeting where they announce the decision. In my experience across multiple industries, real decisions happen in the pre-meeting, the hallway conversation, the lunch with the VP, the text thread between 2 directors. By the time the official meeting starts, the outcome is often already determined. If you are not in those pre-conversations, you are reacting to decisions instead of influencing them. And this is where it gets particularly challenging for Black women. We are often excluded from those informal spaces, not always intentionally, but consistently. The golf outings, the happy hours, the early morning coffee with the boss. If you are not being invited, it is not because your work does not qualify you. It is because the informal system has its own access codes and nobody handed you the manual. Observation point 2, information channels. Every organization has information brokers. These are the people who always seem to know what is happening before anyone else. They are not necessarily senior leaders. They might be executive assistants, project managers, or long tenured individual contributors who have built relationships across departments. Identifying who these people are and building genuine relationships with them is a strategic move, not political maneuvering. Information is currency in organizations, and you need to be in the flow of it. Observation point 3: resource allocation beyond the budget. When I talk about resources, I am not just talking about headcount or budget dollars. I am talking about stretch assignments, high visibility projects, access to mentors and sponsors, invitations to leadership development programs. These resources often flow through the informal system, and they are distributed based on relationships and perception as much as performance. This is why two people with identical performance ratings can have completely different career trajectories. One understood the resource allocation game, the other was playing by the rules that were written on paper. Observation point 4: social dynamics and rituals. Every organization has social rituals that matter more than they appear to. The team lunch culture, the way birthdays are handled, how people celebrate wins, whether your leaders do walking meetings. These rituals create belonging and visibility. Participating in them strategically, and I emphasize strategically, helps you build the relational capital that translates into influence. Now, let me connect this to my high-value leadership trademark methodology. The stewardship of culture pillar is specifically about understanding that culture is not a decorative element. It is the operating system of your organization. And when you understand the operating system, you can work within it, around it, or even change it. But you cannot do any of those things if you do not first decode it. Now I want to spend real time on something from the chapter that I think is one of the most important concepts for Black women to understand: the hypervisibility/invisibility paradox. And if you have been in corporate spaces for any length of time, you know exactly what I am talking about, even if you have never had a name for it. The paradox works like this: you are hypervisible when it does not serve you, and invisible when it would. Your mistake in a presentation gets remembered and discussed for weeks, but your innovative solution that saved the project timeline, that gets attributed to the team with no specific acknowledgement of your contribution. You get asked to speak on the diversity panel because they need a face, but when the strategic planning committee is formed, somehow you are not on the list. In the book, I reference Zora Neale Hurston's powerful observation about feeling most visible as different when placed against a contrasting background. And that captures the exhausting duality perfectly. You are constantly being seen and simultaneously not being seen. Your presence is noted, but your substance is overlooked. Here's what makes this particularly insidious. It creates a double bind. If you advocate for yourself aggressively to combat the invisibility, you risk being labeled as difficult, angry, or not a team player, which increases negative hypervisibility. But if you stay quiet and let your work speak for itself, the invisibility continues and your contributions remain uncredited. So, what is the strategic response? In the book, I outline what I call strategic visibility, and I want to expand on that today with a framework I use in my consulting work. The SEEN framework. S. Systematize your documentation. This is non-negotiable. You need a running record of your contributions, and it needs to include quantifiable outcomes. Not "I helped with the project," but "I designed the stakeholder communication strategy that reduced cross-departmental conflict by 40%. Numbers are harder to make invisible. E. Elevate through allies. Build what I call an amplification network. These are colleagues, peers, and leaders who will name your contributions in rooms where you are not present. This is different from sponsorship, though it can lead there. It is about having people who will say, "That was Shay's idea," or "That solution came from her analysis." You cannot always control the narrative, but you can equip others to carry it. E. Engineer your moments. Strategic visibility means choosing when and how you become visible. Volunteer for the presentation that puts you in front of senior leadership. Write the summary document for the cross-functional project. Send the follow-up email that captures key decisions and positions your role in the outcome. These are not random acts of visibility. They are engineered. N. Narrate your impact. In your one-on-ones, in your performance reviews, in your team meetings, practice narrating your impact in concrete terms. Not bragging, narrating. There is a difference. Bragging is ego-driven. Narrating is evidence-driven. When you say, the approach I implemented resulted in a 15% reduction in turnover in Q3, that is narration. That is data. And data is much harder to make invisible. Let me take you into the story behind this chapter's quote, because Toni Morrison's life and career is a masterclass in navigating institutions with strategic intelligence while refusing to be diminished by them. Toni Morrison was born Chloe Ardelia Wofford in Lorain, Ohio in 1931. She grew up in a working-class family that valued storytelling, language, and intellectual curiosity. She attended Howard University, then earned her master's from Cornell, and then she entered a world that was not designed for her, the New York publishing industry. She became an editor at Random House, and I want you to sit with that for a moment. A Black woman in the 1960s and 70s editing books at one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the world. She was navigating a corporate culture that was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and operating on unwritten rules that she had to decode in real time. But here is what made Morrison extraordinary in terms of strategic intelligence. She did not try to become the institution. She used the institution. As an editor, she championed Black voices, publishing works by Angela Davis, Toni Cade Bambara, Gail Jones, and Muhammad Ali. She understood the formal system, the editorial process, the business of publishing, and she leveraged the informal system, her relationships, her credibility, her reputation to create space for stories that the industry had historically ignored. And then she did something even more remarkable. She wrote her own novels, starting with The Bluest Eye in 1970, while working full-time as a single mother of 2 sons. She was not waiting for someone to give her permission to create. She was navigating the institution during the day and building her own legacy at night. When Song of Solomon was published in 1977, it became a main selection of the Book of the Month Club, the first novel by a Black author to receive that distinction since Richard Wright. And then Beloved in 1987, which won the Pulitzer Prize. And in 1993, she became the first Black woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. Here is the leadership lesson for us. Morrison did not achieve all of that by ignoring the system. She achieved it by understanding the system deeply enough to know where the leverage points were and what weight she needed to release. The politics of publishing, the burden of being the only Black woman in the room, the expectation that she should be grateful for access rather than demanding transformation. She let go of the weight of other people's definitions and limitations, and that is what allowed her to fly. She once said that the function of racism is distraction, that it keeps you explaining your reason for being. Morrison refused to spend her career explaining herself. She spent it creating. And that distinction between performing for the system and producing within it is the essence of navigating corporate culture with strategic intelligence. Where in your career are you spending more energy explaining your right to be in the room than actually doing the work you were put there to do? That is the weight Morrison is telling you to release. Let me bring this into the workplace with 2 scenarios that I see repeatedly in organizations. Scenario 1, the culture decoder. There was a company where a Black woman director had been passed over for a senior leadership role 3 times. Her performance reviews were excellent. Her 360 feedback was strong. But each time, the role went to someone who, on paper, was less qualified. When we looked at the situation through the lens of Chapter 2, the pattern became clear. The decisions about that role were not being made in the formal process. They were being made in informal spaces she had no access to. The hiring manager played golf every Saturday with two of the three interview panelists. The previous person in the role had been personally recruited at an industry conference that she had never been invited to attend. Once she understood the informal system, her strategy changed. She did not try to force herself into the golf game. She identified parallel informal spaces where she could build genuine relationships with decision makers. She started attending the same industry conferences. She requested a monthly coffee meeting with the division head. She made her strategic thinking visible through a monthly insights brief that went to senior leadership. Within one performance cycle, she was not just considered for the role, she was recruited for it. Scenario 2, the microaggression strategist. Here is another pattern I encounter. There was an organization where a Black woman VP was consistently experiencing what I call competence questioning. In every meeting, her recommendations were met with skepticism that her peers' recommendations never received. She would propose a strategy and get asked for 3 rounds of additional data. Her white male counterpart would propose a similar strategy and get immediate buy-in. Instead of absorbing that frustration, which is what most people do, she used the strategic response framework from Chapter 2. She started documenting the pattern with dates, context, and specific examples. She chose to address it first with inquiry. I noticed my proposals seem to require more validation than others. Can you help me understand what additional information would build confidence up front? That question forced the bias into the open without being accusatory. It shifted the burden of explanation from her to the person engaging in the behavior. And over time, combined with her documentation, it created a basis for a broader conversation about equity in decision-making. The lesson from both scenarios is the same. Strategic intelligence is not about being passive. It is about being precise. You are not accepting the system, you are decoding it, positioning yourself within it, and when necessary, disrupting it. But you do it with data, with relationships, and with intentionality. All right, here's your assignment for this week. I call this the Culture Decoder Challenge, and it builds directly on the organizational navigation map exercise in Chapter 2. Day 1 and 2, observe like an anthropologist. For 2 full workdays, I want you to observe your organization like a researcher, not a participant. Notice who speaks first in meetings and who gets interrupted. Notice whose ideas are credited by name and whose are absorbed by the group. Notice who gets invited to the informal conversations after the meeting ends. Write it all down. No judgment, just data. Day 3, map the power flow. Take your observations and draw a simple map. On one side, put the formal hierarchy. On the other side, draw the actual influence lines you observed. Where do they overlap? Where do they diverge? The gaps between the formal chart and the actual power flow tell you everything about how your organization really operates. Day 4, locate yourself. Put yourself on both maps. In the formal system, where are you positioned? And in the informal system, where are your actual connections? Are there senior leaders you have no informal access to? Are there informal information brokers you have not built relationships with? The gaps you identify become your strategic priorities. Day 5, build your action plan. Based on your map, identify 3 specific actions you will take in the next 30 days. Maybe it is requesting a meeting with someone 2 levels above you. Maybe it is joining a cross-functional working group that gives you visibility in a new area. Maybe it is building a relationship with the executive assistant who seems to know everything before everyone else. Whatever it is, make it specific and time-bound. Before we close the main content, I want to give you one more exercise that ties directly to Morrison's wisdom about releasing weight in order to fly. I call this the weight inventory, and it is designed to help you separate what is yours to carry from what is not. Take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left side, write mine to carry. On the right side, write not mine. Under mine to carry, list the things that are genuinely your responsibility: your professional development, your strategic thinking, your relationship building, your performance, your integrity, your well-being. These are the things that make you a stronger leader and that you have direct control over. Under not mine, list the things you have been carrying that were never yours: other people's discomfort with your presence, the burden of representing all Black women, the emotional labor of managing someone else's bias, the guilt of saying no to the diversity committee when your plate is full, the need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as competent. Look at that right-hand column. That is the weight Morrison is telling you to release. Not because it does not exist, it absolutely does, but because carrying it is stealing energy that should be going toward your strategic advancement. You are not ignoring those realities. You are refusing to let them define your capacity. Audre Lorde reinforced this same principle when she wrote about the deliberate choice of using her energy for creation rather than explanation. Every ounce of energy you spend managing weight that is not yours is energy you are not spending on strategy, innovation, and leadership. And in 2026, when the professional landscape is shifting rapidly, you cannot afford that energy drain. Let me bring this all home. Toni Morrison told us the truth. You want to fly, you have got to give up the weight that is holding you down. Today, we decoded the dual operating system of corporate culture, the formal and the informal. We unpacked the hypervisibility/invisibility paradox and gave you the scene framework to combat it. We learned from Morrison's own career how to navigate institutions with strategic intelligence rather than trying to become the institution. And we looked at real scenarios of Black women who transformed their trajectories by becoming culture decoders instead of culture absorbers. Your organization has a hidden operating system. Now you have the tools to decode it. You have the framework to make your contributions strategically visible. And you have permission, not that you needed it, to release the weight that was never yours to carry. Here is what I want you to do right now. If you have not downloaded my free Shield Resilience Strategy Guide, the link is in the show notes below. It pairs perfectly with the weight inventory exercise we did today. And if you do not have your copy of Rise and Thrive, A Black Woman's Blueprint for Leadership Excellence, Chapter 2 goes even deeper into the frameworks we covered, including the complete organizational navigation map exercise. Those links are all in the description. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Blackman Brief, my free weekly newsletter, where I deliver leadership strategies, career insights, and tools for navigating exactly these kinds of challenges. That link is also below. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, what is one unwritten rule in your organization that nobody talks about but everyone follows? Naming it is the first step to decoding it. And your insight might just become the focus of a future Ask Shay deep dive. And remember, if you are getting value from these Wednesday deep dives, make sure you are also tuning in on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the Unlock, Empower, Transform podcast. That is where we explore high-value leadership trademark for all leaders and dig into transforming organizations through purposeful culture. But Wednesdays are ours. Until next week, remember, the system was not designed for you, but you were designed to transform it. Navigate strategically, release the weight, and fly. I'm Shay Blackman, and this has been Rise and Thrive. Rise above, thrive within, lead always.